A major escalation in the Ukraine war may be underway. North Korea has reportedly deployed as many as 2,000 troops in Ukraine. And according to both South Korean and Ukrainian intelligence, Vladimir Putin is training thousands more inside Russia. North Korea denies its troops are there. South Korea is warning Russia it may send weapons to Ukraine as a countermeasure. Joining us with more is former congressional staffer and security analyst Brandon Weichert. He's the author of the book, A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine. Brandon, it's good to talk with you. So what do you make of this? North Korean troops in Ukraine, South Korea responding by possibly sending arms to Zelensky. Do we know for certain that the North Korean troops are there, and is this an escalation?
Absolutely, they're there. And in fact, they're not the only nation that has troops in the war on both sides. There are multiple foreign actors fighting each other. It's a proxy war. And so this is just the latest escalation. And furthermore, it is exactly as I feared, and this is why I wrote the book. Basically, the Ukrainian war has become an insuperable wound in the international body, and it's going to lead, if we're not careful, to World War III.
Well, Kim Jongun wouldn't send troops to help Russia in Ukraine unless he got something in return. So what would Putin likely give him for helping Russia? What would that mean for the U.S.?
Well, they likely gave him more weapons technology. The North Koreans have wanted to get more and more access to greater levels of sophisticated weapons systems. So I'm sure on some level they are engaging in some kind of trade, maybe over hypersonic weapon development. Russia leads the world in real world applications of hypersonic weapons. China's right behind them. We're in third place. So it could be something like that. It could certainly be greater diplomatic coverage, more intelligence sharing, a greater economic alliance between North Korea always needs more trading partners. Russia needs trading partners. So there you have a natural alliance there. But it is certainly a result of what I believe are failed U.S. and NATO policies in Ukraine that have driven Russia not only into the arms of North Korea, but also, more importantly, into the arms of China.
Well, I want to talk about your book in a moment, but first, former British Prime Minister David Cameron says India should be brought in to help negotiate peace to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Prime Minister Modi seems to have a good relationship with Russian President Putin. So what do you think of that idea? And why are we still not seeing peace talks after more than 2.5 years of war?
Well, I think anything that ends the war as quickly and peacefully as possible is what we need. The Biden administration has spent the last several years alienating India to the best of its ability for reasons that remain unknown. They have something to do with the fact that India has a close alliance with Russia. They've always had that, though, and they're never going to abandon it. And so, yes, that would be a great thing to do, would be to use India's great relations with Russia as a leverage point to get a deal from a third party that's impartial, truly impartial to the conflict. But it's important to note that there was a peace offering on the table within 4 or 5 months of the war beginning. It was Boris Johnson, who was the former Prime Minister of Britain after David Cameron, of course, and Joe Biden, who nixed the Istanbul conference, wherein Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, and Putin were supposed to meet and basically split Ukraine in half, ceding the Russian-speaking eastern Ukraine and Russian-controlled Crimean Peninsula to Russia and leaving the West in free Ukrainian hands. But that deal was scuppered not by Putin. It was scuppered by Biden and Johnson at the time, who obviously wanted the war to continue. I had a U.S. general at the time I consult for the DOD tell me point blank that, don't you understand, we're breaking the Russian army in the field. This is the mentality of the West right now. But the Russian army isn't breaking. They're just getting help now. It's the Ukrainian army that's breaking, unfortunately.
And in the meantime, we've got tens of thousands dead, and Ukraine's a mess. So
yeah,
tell us more about your book. How did the U.S. and its NATO allies lose Ukraine?
Well, the first thing we did was we let the war happen. Had Trump Donald Trump been president, I don't believe the conflict would have happened. I think Ukraine would have continued on as it was in 2019, which was in a much better condition than it is in 2024. And something like 24 million Ukrainians have either fled the country or been lost in conflict. And that country will never recover. It will never be the same as it was before 2022 when the Russians invaded. The Russians invaded, yes, the Russians are not our friends, but the Russians invaded because they believe, and I think they're right to some degree, they were provoked over many decades by the West into doing this. First, after the end of the Cold War, the George H.W. Bush administration promised Mikhail Gorbachev that NATO would not move an inch eastward. Of course, that promise was broken almost immediately. And then in 1994, Bill Clinton negotiated the removal of what was at the time the third largest nuclear weapons arsenal in the world in Ukraine. In exchange, of course, the Russians didn't know this, but in exchange for the U.S. saying that they would defend Ukraine militarily if the Russians ever came knocking again. And well, here we are, and we are now in a proxy war with the largest nuclear weapons state, Russia, in the world. And also, thanks to Obama's 2010 New START agreement, Russia has the most sophisticated tactical nuclear weapons stockpile in the world, and they will use them if they think they're going to lose Crimea, which is an important naval base, Sevastopol, for the Russian Navy in the Black Sea.
Okay, I know a lot of people are praying for Ukraine. The book is A Disaster of Our Own Making, How the West Lost Ukraine. Brandon Weichert, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. God bless.